in the evergreen space is basically like looking at the start of a horse race.
So I'd love to understand how you feel your background in derivatives and derivative structuring has helped inform how you think about the creation of evergreen structures.
Well, I think what I had to do when a structure and when working on derivatives was being very, very logical and quantitative in everything I was doing. So when you're pricing or when you're even designing complex payouts, you need to understand what could be appealing to the end investor and make sure that you're very rigorous in the process of designing that product and pricing it, right? And I think in all this, it's a rigorous portfolio construction approach is ultimately what can distinguish a first-class offering from a more mediocre one. A first-class offering is, it's in general an offering that remains true to the promise that it makes commercially to the investors.
On that point, what do you think is the hardest part about creating the right evergreen structure and outcomes for investors?
Right here, right now, trying to ensure as much as you can that these products are sitting in the right place in the portfolio allocation of the end investor.
How do you think about future-proofing evergreen structures?
So first, as I was mentioning before, I think it's important education and proper communication and positioning. Future-proofing to me means reaching as much as possible and as consistently as possible that target return promise. And then a third element of future-proofing, in my opinion, is a stable offering. And when I say stable offering, I mean doing all you can to ensure your portfolio construction is as balanced as possible, to try and minimize the situation that no one wants, which is prolonged gating and negative, let's say, headline news risk.
Why are evergreens so expensive to launch and then manage?
Evergreens require, first of all, an ongoing investment, a fundraising strategy, which means continuous efforts, which means events, which means addressing in very different shapes and forms a much more diverse investor base. And evergreens mean also a continuous deployment strategy where the investment strategy doesn't change neither, but you're constantly, in a very path-dependent way, constantly looking at what you are today as a function of what you've done yesterday and what you want to do tomorrow.
So that brings up a really important point, which is the discipline that both the distribution team and the team managing the evergreen structure on the deal side has to deal with. How do you think about that aspect of things in terms of limiting inflows to make sure that you continue to meet return targets?
So the first, in a context where there's excess liquidity generated by subscriptions or exits, I think someone who manages an evergreen has to make some tough choices. And if you look at evergreens, you would probably agree with me that the lower the liquidity sleeve level, the better. Because you don't want to go out to investors who want to have private market exposure and tell them that you're sitting on 20% of cash. But end of 2021 was a great example. After you deploy so much and after you have so much subscription, I think, and I was in that situation, partially by luck, but partially by design. Well, those are the moments when the industry should have no problems and say, now I sit on a bit more cash, which means my investment level goes a little bit lower. And that gains me time. I dilute you locally. I dilute you. But bear with me. And then it happens that in February 2022, unfortunately, the war in Ukraine starts and you have a vehicle which has 20% cash. So you have the opportunity to, if any opportunities are coming up, can basically benefit from it.
And I think managing that psychological element for the end investors who are allocating to the evergreens, I think is really important to think about and talk about. How do you think about the psychological element of all of this? And then I think that relates to the educational element of all of this.
Well, I think the key is, again, to have a very diverse investor base, because you'll always have situations where fast money in a certain region might redeem. You might have a situation where institutional investors that you think are very sticky and very stable might redeem altogether. At the end of the day, they have specific dynamics which might affect them and trigger redemptions even in a moment when you wouldn't expect. So diversification across investor base, I think, is key.
You mentioned institutional investors. The evergreen structures have generally tended to be products that have been built and suited for the wealth channel, but it doesn't mean institutions can't use them.
I think the axiom of choice should be defended in any place and any time. I see evergreens as a very useful tool, investment tool, when it comes to any sort of institutional investor, large or small scale, because the flexibility they give. Now, clearly, if I'm thinking the way a large Canadian or Asian or American pension scheme could work, I think, let's say, flexibility will still be useful, but you want to preserve an allocation which you control as close as possible. So I see for large institutional investors with that expertise, evergreens useful mainly from a flexibility, because of flexibility offering.
You mentioned one benefit of evergreens. In your mind, what are the biggest benefits of evergreen structures?
Well, I mean, I hate the word democratization, and I'm mentioning myself just because
You're not alone in that.
But in a way, and often it happens when a slogan sticks so well is because it's partially true. So I think providing access to an investment strategy like private capital in general to a wider set of investors, I think that is ultimately what I think evergreens are best accomplishing. And democratization, again, is not the right word. But I think it's fair to acknowledge that an asset class which was a club deal for few in the late 80s and 90s is now something that people can look at more actively. I think that's a benefit.
When you think about EQT's platform, what do you think about the platform plays to the strength of being able to create evergreen vehicles?
I don't want to sound arrogant in any case. I'm just commenting on other people's work, which is again the deal team. I think EQT is well recognized, especially when it comes to large institutional investor as a top house when it comes to deploying capital. When it comes to deploy capital with a strong sectorial expertise, and therefore that ability to create value and to transform companies. Clearly, we are a brand that I think is very well positioned to this regard. And this capability, you don't gain it overnight, you don't lose it overnight. An evergreen that can deliver that alpha to a wider set of investors, I think serves a purpose in the investment space.
William, this has been a fantastic conversation.
Likewise. Thank you for having me.
Likewise.